All right, I'm here with Leo and David from Down Under. So the opposite side of the planet, the opposite season. They're coming into winter. I'm going into summer here in San Diego. But we're talking about radio frequency issues. So Leo and David, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Nick.
Thanks, Nick.
Yeah. So let's. I'm super psyched to have you guys on. Let's sketch out the problem. Is that there is an issue, and luckily, Leo, you've dealt with this issue before, facing Australia as far as the frequencies go. Leo, do you want to kind of walk me through what the issue is?
The issue is that there was a decision made the decision was made in December. We just found out very recently that the decision was actually made to move Australia from the Australian AU 915 frequency band FSB2 we're using here to the Asian AS 9231. There's four of those AS 923 bands, but it's the AS 9231.
Okay. And that's a problem because you're going from, like, tell me why that's a big issue.
In Australia, the biggest issue is we are a very big country. We've got a lot of distances to cover. So there's quite a number of issues with AS 923. The predominant one seems to be the transmission power. So the AS 923 is limited to 16 dBm EIRP, whereas AU 915 runs at 30. Now we in Australia have, and I specifically work a lot in regions, so we have vast distances with not very many population. So that seems to be the core issue. There's quite a number of other technical differences in terms of the number of frequency bands available. AU 915 is very similar to US 915. So it's a half duplex versus a simplex frequency plan as well.
Okay, cool. So that's the problem, is that we've got two frequencies, and right now it looks like Helium is that the deciding entity is saying, hey, we're going to use the weaker frequency. Am I kind of understanding that as the broad sketch?
That is pretty much the case, yeah.
Okay, cool.
Sorry, Nick. I guess the
Yeah.
other issue is this is happening midway, and it's not. We already implemented so much. I mean, when I got involved in the whole project, well, it's everything is AU 915. So much so, I did a video on just explaining the differences so that people can understand everything. And suddenly, it's just out of the blue. You says, "Oh no, let's go for AS 923." It's like, there's a lot of WTF. What's going on here? Why is this happening? We're already so far down the road.
Okay.
Is it more question? Well, why? This is not making sense. We were running on a plan which has been prepared for us, so to speak.
Okay, cool. I think I understand that. And
I could give you a car analogy. I mean, Australia is a big country, so we like our cars. And so at the moment, Australia is also quite a dangerous place to drive in dusk or dawn because of kangaroos and possums. Oh, sorry, other animals. And you're driving a ute, as we call it, sort of a Toyota Hilux. I don't want to make any ads here. And all of a sudden you get handed a Nissan Micra. That's really the analogy that I sort of try to use in terms of a non-technical car.
yep. No, I think this makes a fair amount of sense. So we'll dig into it. Let's do a little bit of background on you guys. I know, David, you've been on the show before, but Leo, what's your background? Where are you coming from on this one?
Look, I've been in LoRaWAN now for about 6 years. I run a small non-for-profit here called the Growing Data Foundation, which sort of been the initiator of the South Australian TTN network. So we've started very early with the first Kickstarter gateways here in 2017. We got them. We got them a year later. So I've been in LoRaWAN for quite some time, and we're obviously doing a bit of public open data advocacy work as well. And as my day job, I'm also working in agricultural technology. So I do a lot of work in the Australian regions, regional towns, with farmers and ag tech.
Okay, and you're a software guy, right? Not a radio guy.
Yes, yeah. My background is actually database web application development for the last 30 years. I might be giving away my age here, but
yeah, you're in your early 30s. Okay. Yeah, and then David, you've been on the show before, basically like a radio expert. I think we've talked about. Is there anything that you think specific to this will help people understand why you're kind of applicable to the conversation?
Well, my key fundamental interest is antenna design, and that's the first one that I had here as well, and that's what we do at RF Shop is really focus a lot on the I would call it the passive side of what we're doing in these or all applications really. So it's from the output of the amplifier, and we even go down into the amplifier side. It's basically from the amplifiers, connectors, cables, and the antennas. And then of course the key thing, and Leo already touched on that for me, is that the massive frustration is that EIRP. Because that's a huge number. It's not even just now that's half the power because we're looking in a dB scale, a logarithmic scale. So dropping from 30 down to 16, that is a massive change. And that's to me the biggest thing is as an antenna guy and basically end to end kind of what's between my hotspot and the device on the other side. That whole link in between, that's where my passion is. And if you
Yep.
tell us suddenly that no, you have 14 dB less to work with, that's a huge number, and that has a massive impact on the rural areas. So, as an Australian citizen, it's like really this is not useful for us. That's where I
Right.
come from.
Okay. Yep, that makes a ton of sense. And just to hammer that point home for folks who are not familiar with the whole dB logarithmic scale, is that we're not just going from 30 down to 16, and there's like 14 steps to go. Each three of those steps is a halving in power, and so we got 7 halvings. So it goes half and half of that and half of that and half of that, and all the way down to 16. So it's a giant difference. Okay, I think I understand the problem. What what do you guys think is driving this? Because it doesn't make sense to me, but things that Helium does usually make sense eventually if we understand them, or sometimes they made a mistake and we just need to make sure we highlight that. But what do you think might have driven this switch from, was it 915 to 9, what was it, 28? 923. Okay. Yep.
Look, if you look at the pull request that has been made, I mean, there's very little information available.
Okay.
The argument is around regional roaming, and apparently AS923 is the becoming the de facto standard in Australia, which nobody really living here has actually seen. For
Okay.
example, the first argument is that there is 3 large operators in the region. So that's NNNCo and Ventia here in Australia, and Spark in New Zealand are using AS923, which is obviously correct, and they did it for the reason. Usually, the reason was, and I was actually in Lorraine at that stage. When there was no AU915 devices available. The sort of the very early days, there was Asian devices available, and the real issue that we are having here in Australia is that AS923 is just a small subset of AU915. So from a regulator's perspective, both of them are okay because the AS923 is just a subset of AU915. So other countries don't have that issue. I mean, usually in other countries, different frequency plan is not within the regulation. So we have a fairly unique problem here. So what they failed to mention in that PR there's actually 5 networks that are using AU915. I'm counting Helium there, and Helium is actually the largest one.
Huh.
The
Okay.
main issue here is that and by far, I mean, the Helium now, I haven't checked this today and yesterday, but on early in the week we were 5,100 gateways. So you're expecting basically 5,100 gateway operators to change their gateways because 2 operators, which probably have a few hundred, aren't prepared to do that. That sort of seems to be one of the issues that we're talking here. The others are I'm just looking at that PR
Sure.
on the other screen,
Yeah.
roaming with other countries, which doesn't really stack up either because the largest Australian neighbor, Indonesia, has AS9233. And New Zealand, Australia, and Papua New Guinea are already on AU915. So if roaming would be an issue, we can do it now. That's sort of an argument that doesn't actually stack up. Uh, Yeah, so it seems a commercially driven deal. And from what we can sort of find out now, I mean, the information hasn't actually been shared. The sad thing is also the communications about all of this. The decision was made in a LoRaWAN committee meeting in December,
Hmm.
but the recording was only made available mid February. So, and the reason for this is probably that HIP 14 was in the decision phase. Sorry, HIP 45 was in the
45. Yeah.
decision phase, and they already knew because they actually had to reverse this decision in September. So that decision was made already once, and they knew that the Australian Helium community was dead against that. So it was made in December in a meeting, but we didn't know about the decision till mid February.
Got it. Okay. Okay. So it seems it does it's like something's not adding up for me, and I think this is just, I mean, this is just a conversation. Is if 923 is a subset of 915, both of them are legal. The big difference is that 923 is much weaker than 915. And the reason that that Helium Inc., and I hesitate to put any kind of words in their mouth, but that they might choose it from your perspective, is that there are, let's say, 400 or a couple hundred gateways who are run by basically one entity, one of these two or three commercial entities who are saying, hey, we're on 923. That's what we want to stay on. Is that, am I kind of understanding what you guys are thinking? Is that correct?
That's correct. I mean, it comes back to one entity, and there's been a roaming deal announced, and obviously from all we can determine, it's coming back to that. So Helium Inc. made a roaming deal, and which nobody actually has anything against it. I mean, we are
Right.
all for roaming. I run quite a fleet of gateways ourselves, and nobody has an issue with roaming. The issue
Right.
is that in Australia, we are expected to downgrade 5,000, or by the time the decision will be made, it'll be 6,000 or 7,000
Yep.
gateways. So that is the real issue.
Got it. And then I'll ask the stupid question: is that you can't use a 915 device on 923? Is that correct?
That is correct, and the only reason I'm hesitating
Yeah.
is there is a I call it a foul compromise, FSB 6, which is or it really depends where you count. If you start your subbands at 0, it's FSB 5. If you count at 1, which Helium actually does because we're currently on FSB 2, it should probably be called FSB 6. That matches somehow with AS923, and it could be made to work. The problem is it's got some downsides. Now, as I said, I'm not an RF engineer, but we have got some really excellent expertise here.
Yeah.
There's some channel overlaps, and also the other issue there is you have to change the gateways anyway. So it's a change that seems totally unnecessary.
Cool.
Actually,
David, what do you got on that?
well, I'm just actually thinking, and I'm not an interviewer or interviewee, but I do have a comment or a question, Leo, on that,
Yeah.
because in my this is now experience as I'm learning. I've been learning Helium. I've been learning LoRaWAN since like 6 weeks, 6 weeks, 6 months ago, where I got involved
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
all of this. And one of the biggest issues I had, which was a dumb thing to do, but the information is not out there in general. And this is what led me to a video I did, which was 915 AU versus US, because we bought something on DigiKey, right?
Yep.
digikey.com.au. It's an Australian version of the DigiKey website. We bought a
Yep.
LoRaWAN device because we wanted to play with this on the Helium network.
Sure.
I mean, and in my video where I spoke about this, I was very cautious not to say I bought it on DigiKey, but everybody knows DigiKey, and there's nothing dodgy about DigiKey.
Yeah.
It turns out this is a US 915 device. Nothing in what I bought as an end user. At the time, I was just an end user keen to get going on getting a device on the Helium network.
Yep.
This didn't work. It didn't work because it was a US, well, I can only make an hypothesis, because I either can't confirm that, but we just couldn't get this thing to work. And when we look back at the paperwork, this is a US 915 device, which we bought in Australia for AU 915. Now, if you introduce another complexity here, which is what's going to happen here, you're just going to explode the confusion even more. That now you have another band. We don't have US 915, we do AS 923. And yes, it is possible for everybody to maybe do a firmware update, but can you do it on devices? And do you have to reach to every single unit that's out there and then say, okay, let's reverse our traces back to 6 months ago? Meanwhile, we had this massive explosion on Helium. Everybody is getting their stuff out there, and now we want to reverse this. I'm not talking technically, I'm talking project management and business sense from a user and a Helium perspective. It is, you need to communicate these things before you even start this. You need to tell people this is what we're thinking before you do it. And you need to kind of get out there and then get a proper process in place before you even think about doing this. And in this case, it just feels like it's been rolling and we're falling behind, and maybe some key stakeholders are not appreciating the big machine that they're trying to mess around with something that seems to be inferior.
Yeah,
That,
it's interesting. I mean, I'll be the Jhole here and say that one guess I would have is that
yeah,
this is going to sound like a total American
uh,
just dick,
owner
is that
you are.
there's 9,000 devices in San Diego. Like just in my
Yeah,
city, there's 9,000 gateways.
yeah,
So 5,000 helium hotspots in Australia.
yeah,
It, it, I can see how it's like, well, it's only 5,000 of them. Like, we
yes,
don't need to really worry about that. Now,
yes,
I'm
yeah,
not saying that that is true,
no,
but I can totally see how that might come up and be like, well, this is not a big problem for Helium Inc. Right? Is they're worrying about the 600,000 or 700,000 on the network, and 5,000
mm,
in Oz is not a big deal. Now, that's
mm,
again, obviously, that's not
Exactly what
okay.
it's exactly what we would be arguing. Just leave
Yeah,
us alone. We have
yeah,
the frequency band that we need. So
yep,
if that's the case, that's exactly what we're asking. We don't want it to be changed. So this change has been forced upon us. But also you should see the growth here. I realize that the numbers probably wouldn't make anybody in the US lose any sleep, but
yep,
we've started a lot later, so you guys got your manufacturing ramped up a lot faster, and the gateway manufacturers started obviously because you're a larger market a lot earlier. So we only got gateways about 10 months ago. So we are on a very nice growth trajectory. So it's
yep.
but in the end, all we're asking is, yes, Australia is a small market, and we're happy the way it is. Just leave us alone.
Right. Okay. So the kind of solution on your guys' side is, and I'm not super familiar with how these hips work or how they get voted on, is a vote to reverse this switch from 915, which is this big wide section that you guys have, down to 923. As you're saying, no, just go back to 915 and let it go as it was begun, which is how the whole thing started off. Okay.
Yeah, that already happened. So that committee voted already once in September,
To do
and
that.
it was quickly reversed because of community concerns.
Okay.
And then it was just under behind closed doors for 3 months. The decision was made again, and that's sort of the sad thing about it. It's the communications, like David said. There was no ability to plan or discuss, and there's even no discussion at the moment. I mean, the PR has been closed. It's an absolute joke. The way this whole process has been run. I mean, they're not
Yeah.
even following the HIP process as far as we can tell.
Okay. I mean, my guess is that with this, not like I'm some big shot, but at least it's out there, and we get this idea out there that it seems like a pretty straightforward problem and pretty easy to reverse. Now, let me ask the other side, the folks who are kind of celebrating because they got their 923, are they going to be negatively impacted if it goes back to 915?
Everything stays the same. I mean,
Okay.
what is the issue for those two operators that are on AS923 is that their devices can't basically use the Helium network, and that's the case as it is now. It won't
Okay.
negatively impact them, but they won't have obviously the opportunity to roam onto the Helium network, and but that can easily be fixed by them changing their devices to AU915, and so there's no issue about that that we have some problem with roaming in Australia. We would love to roam, and there is, as I said, there's 4 other networks operators in Australia that run on AU915, and we would be welcoming. In fact, we are actually talking to some of those at the moment.
Okay. So maybe one solution ends up being that, and this is, I've found this everywhere, is that there's some people who have too many gateways, right? They don't have enough places to put them. And so maybe if there's just a building of the community and building of connections between those specific operators who have a couple hundred of the 923s, and you figure who's got too many 915s and see how you swap that stuff out. I mean, that sounds kind of pie in the sky and probably a little bit believing that everyone is really nice. And sometimes people are just super competitive. But maybe that's kind of one direction to go in. But it sounds to me like there's 5,000 of these things on one side and there's a couple hundred of these things on the other, and right now the smaller group is kind of winning the fight, but that doesn't make sense in the long run. And especially if you think of Australia as a big country with this kind of need for larger range, it seems to me to make more sense to push everything over to 915.
Or
I want,
leave it on 915.
leave it on 915. Yeah, yeah. So so today is March 22nd, 2022, and we're recording this. When is it supposed to go from 915 to 923?
The problem is nobody knows.
Unknown. Okay.
The whole process is sort of made up as we go along. I mean, we don't
Sure.
even know. So the HIP 45 procedure mandates a 4-week process of written community consultation,
Mm-hmm.
which has been sort of stopped after 3 weeks because they closed the PR.
Mm-hmm.
So we've been asking questions in the relevant Discord channels and on GitHub as to what's happening, but nobody really knows at this stage. There's a town hall, a
Mm-hmm.
virtual town hall that will be held if there's still community concern about AU915, which there will be because there's already, I think, 8 or 10 people that have registered their formal dissent.
Mm-hmm.
It will go to a Helium vote, so on chain vote, where every gateway owner apparently in the affected region, and at the moment they're dumping Australia and New Zealand together, which we don't believe is a good idea because they're separate countries, separate regulatory regimes.
Mm-hmm.
We're asking for that to be split if it comes to a vote. But from everything, really the better way would be for the committee to basically reverse that decision and go back and really do a proper evaluation because that hasn't been done.
Got it. Okay, so it sounds like even if it's not going the way that you're looking for it to go right now, it sounds like there are still a couple steps left before it goes fully against you. Is that right?
That's
Okay.
correct.
Okay.
But
Cool.
unfortunately, it's causing a lot of angst in the community.
Sure.
There's a lot of questions. People are asking, is my gear going to be working in a couple of months? Do I have to buy new gateways? It's really, really unnecessary. And
Yeah.
I can see it from Helium's perspective. I mean, this is a small market, and
Right.
it's causing a lot of problems. I'm sure we have bigger problems to fry. I mean, we have large gaming clusters appearing in Australia somewhere in the middle of nowhere,
Mm-hmm.
and I think there's a lot of issues that need to be solved. This is not one that is necessary.
Yep. Okay. I mean, it all seems reasonable.
Mm.
I dig it. Can we rewind? I've got one question I'd forgotten to ask. And this is probably a David question. Is what's the practical difference in range, given the same antenna, same everything, just the different outputs between a 923 and a 915 whatever gateway?
Well, there's a very basic rule of thumb that we use is every 6 dB is about double distance. So this is when I talk positive stuff to customers. I would say 6 dB more when we have to, you get double distance. So the same would be back down again. So every 6 dB, you would half your distance. So we're talking about
Yep.
12 dB is quarter distance. That's significant. I mean, if we really
Yeah.
want to get a farmer with a, I don't know how big farms are these days, but say 50-kilometer range to his
Yep.
furthest wall, suddenly said, no, you can only get 12.5 kilometers now, and you need to do something to reach that other guy. And you can't go bigger antennas because now we are legally limited by EIRP, which is
Yep.
the
That's the
definition
problem.
of
Yep.
transmit power plus antenna. So that's the
Yep.
legal limit. So you're stuck. You just literally, there's a line they're drawing and say, well, we can't do 50 kilometers. And that's not an unreasonable number for these kind of in 915 in general. Getting
Yeah.
tens up to, like you had yourself had the example that you can see 200 kilometers on a good day. So
Yep.
a quarter of that is not so impressive anymore.
No. 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 Okay. And I think I've seen on the paragliders, we've seen distances from gateway to sensor, which is really what we're talking about.
Yes.
Of I think it was 80. I think it was 80 kilometers. I don't think it was 80 miles. But so if that gets halved twice, that's down to 40 and 20. And so you got a very different thing.
Yeah.
Okay. So
And
it sounds like
I agree that that's uh, stepping into my RF shop mindset here. That there's
yeah.
so much focus for a lot of people between hotspots and hotspots. And if I look at the communication I see on like the local Facebook groups, that everybody's always talking about what I just did myself now is, yeah, man, I can see 80 kilometers, and that's all good. But as you rightly say, at the end of the day, it's the device that's going to be the thing that's crucial. And these antennas in
Yep.
here, literally, if I look at this, it's it's a joke what antennas on there, but that's all you have. So you
Right.
want to make sure your hotspot is as good as you can do,
Yep.
because this is not going to help us at all. And if we just cut like 20 to 25%, it's from network planning perspective, I just said what can you do for a certain farmer? It's not helping us.
Okay. I mean, it seems pretty
Just
straightforward.
to
I
be
think this.
fair on the argument, in Australia, it would actually be, we would be able to use 30 dBm even under AS 9231, which is the argument that Helium was making. The problem is that the device needs to be changed. Most of those devices don't even have the ability to do that in firmware. So
Okay.
that sort of there's an argument saying that the 30 dBm limit isn't real because in Australia, but the AS923 standard says it's the limit, and so the device manufacturer, both on gateways, because the gateway configuration is fixed, will enforce that limit.
So that's because ACMA, which is our local regulatory body, says 30 dBm is our legal limit. So that's why you could. Okay, I got that actually. Yeah, but
Okay, so
that
that
adds
the argument is like,
complexity
hey, you
again.
guys can transmit, and you're saying, look, it's theoretically possible, regulatorily possible, but the devices can't do it, so it doesn't matter.
Practically, it's a non-argument
Practically,
because
thank
it's
you.
never going to happen.
Yep.
Also, that again, the network server could actually then change after OTA join, change the transmission power of the device. The problem is it will never join. Yeah, it's a non-argument really, but I hear it a lot.
Okay. And then if I, I've had this before when I give one side of a conversation on YouTube. What if these other folks, and I don't want to get in the middle of these arguments, but I think this is an important one, and this is part of growing a global network, right? Is there's not going to be one thing that we as a community does right. There's not going to be, Helium Inc. is not going to get everything right. We're going to have these mistakes. This one sounds pretty fixable. But what would be the argument on the side of those two operators that have their couple hundred gateways, other than what we've already covered? Do you think they'd bring up anything else if they got to have their rebuttal piece?
Yeah, I mean the only other thing is that roaming argument that obviously, which to me doesn't stack up because the AS923 is actually used in quite a number of countries. I mean, all of South America. So the argument that there is no support for AS. No, oh, sorry, I'm confusing myself here.
Yeah, yeah,
I've been talking too much about frequency plans. I'm getting
sure.
confused.
Okay, and then I think I missed this roaming piece. Like what can you explain that to me?
The argument that was used in the original PR is that that in the region, AS923 would provide some benefits for regional roaming. Which yeah, I don't think really is an argument, because roaming you will never fix on the network side of things. You're always going to, if you're a transport company and you want to roam, there's quite a number of device manufacturers that I'm aware of are working on roaming devices, but they will actually change the frequency plan according to the country that they're in. So it's actually rather than the countries changing their networks, which will never happen. I mean,
Right.
EU 868, China, um, AS923 has 4 different variants. And they're not compatible with each other. So really, it just doesn't stack up. It seems to be arguments that are made up to suit some outcome, and that's the way it's written. I mean, the whole document that was shared very recently that underlies this process is, don't quote me on that, 6 bullet points. That
Right.
they've sort of been put onto the PR. That was the underlying research for the committee decision, which just doesn't stack up.
Okay. Cool. Well, I think we'll get this out there and we'll put it out and see what happens. And yeah, my guess is that this gets well, who knows? I don't make any promise. My guess is this gets fixed to everyone's satisfaction, or at least enough people's satisfaction that all the folks who've invested in helium so far are probably going to be just fine. That'd be my guess, but because I mean, if we back way out, helium's kind of two things. Is number one is every time I've investigated, and not like I'm an investigative journalist, every time I've looked into anything they've done, even though it didn't make sense at the beginning, I have a lot of faith in them that they're smart enough people that whatever they're doing makes sense in the long term. Or they made a mistake, and just as they did with the when they did the deny list, they came out and they said, "Look, we make this big mistake. This is what we did. This is how we're dealing with it. Let's move on." That wouldn't surprise me if that happened here. And I guess the last piece is that when Frank Monk came on this show, he's like, "Look, we're flying a plane that's on fire. You guys keep the fire out. We're going to keep the plane in the air." And so I kind of expect this, like, there's like an extra fire on the wing that we got to put out. I don't think that they're not looking to throw anyone out of the plane. They got other shit they're doing. So
That's correct. I
I'm
mean,
dealing with
nobody really wants this. I mean,
it. Right.
we have a community here that really wants helium to succeed, and
Yeah.
helium is doing extremely well in Australia. We want
Yeah.
this to work. There shouldn't be two sides to this. We're in one boat.
Yeah.
Let's just get this out of the way.
Love it. All right, guys. That I think that wraps it up for me. Is there anything else that you guys want to add to put the bow on top of this? Or are we pretty good with this?
Well,
I think we've talked enough about frequency plans.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm good.
Right on. Well,
Thanks.
thank you guys a
Thanks, Nick.
ton for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Awesome.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you.